Welcome to episode 56 of Stageworthy. I'm your host, Phil Rickaby. Stageworthy is a podcast about people in Canadian theatre. I'd love to hear from you. If you want to tell me about a project you're working on or just want to drop me a line, you can find Stageworthy on Facebook and Twitter at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website at stageworthypodcast.com. If you like the podcast, I hope you'll subscribe on iTunes or Google Music or whatever podcast app you use, and consider leaving a comment or rating. My guest, Sara Meurling, is an arts administrator and the executive director of the Professional Association of Canadian Theatres. The interesting thing, do you find that working in 9 to 5 in theater, like thinking theater, living theater from 9 to 5, and then going to theater, do you find that draining? Do you find it difficult, or is it?
I think, the job gets tiring, right?
Yeah.
And like any individual, in order to enjoy leisure time activities, you have to be able to have the energy, right? Yeah. And what can happen is that, especially if there's a gap between the end of your workday and picking up the tickets,
yes,
your energy drops right off. And then I don't necessarily think it does service to the piece you're seeing, right? Because you're not bringing your full self.
Yeah.
Whereas if I go do something that is not theater, right, that is dance or film, I can sometimes have that energy. But my partner who works in the nonprofit sector but not in the arts, one of the challenges I have is my big excitement for relaxation is putting on my pajamas. Right?
It's funny because I have the same, like I walk in the door and I am like track pants, comfy clothes, I'm just sitting down.
Yep. And when you actively participate in going out for a living, going out as leisure, can be, it's not as alluring, as it might be.
Yeah, so. Because it's still like there's still that because going out is part of your job, so it's not like it's not special in that way. It's like it still seems like part of your workday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as well, it also, it's knowing too much. Like, I sometimes feel that being a theater professional can suck the magic out of the experience.
Yeah.
I sat on the Dora jury one year, years ago.
That's got to be a tough job.
It was, and I was doing indie at that point, and so there were 70 shows. And what happens is, at a certain point, nobody will go to theater with you anymore. Because you've run out of partners. Partners. And I remember seeing a dreadful, dreadful show. And I had taken my husband, and he was like, "I liked it." I was like, "Meh." And he said, "Why didn't you like it?" And I was like, "Meh." And I was like, "Because it wasn't well done." And I don't know why they did it. And he said, "Well, I'm an audience member and I liked it." And I said, "Well, I think it's great, but my job is actually to be more than a passive receiver. I'm supposed to be able to, I've studied it. I can tell when someone's clearly dropped a line or when a lighting cue is late or,
Yeah, it's tough to go. It's tough to go from. It's hard to when you do it. It's hard to turn off that part of your brain and just sort of let the show take you. It's rarely rare for that to happen. I've had a couple of experiences where that's happened to me recently, but again, that's kind of rare when I can just forget that I know the inside.
That is it is. It's kind of a sadness. It is a bit of a sadness.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the works that really do move you are so extraordinary, and you remember them. and you use them as recharging events. Right? That is why I do this.
Yes, yeah.
So those are the good moments.
Yeah. What does... So, I mean, I have a general idea about what PACT is.
Okay.
But I'd love to know more, like, I think I have sort of like it exists, it must do this. This is the name of it, Professional Association of Canadian Theatres. It must do something with that. But I don't think I know the specifics of what PACT does.
Oh.
So can you tell me, and anybody who might be in the same boat as I do, what PACT does?
Well, we've had an evolved existence. So PACT is 40 years old this year. We were founded in 1976, originally as and this is going to sound like a lecture, please.
Okay, no, please, I love this.
Originally as the group of theatres that came together to negotiate with the newly formed Canadian Actors Equity. Because prior to that, American Actors Equity sort of operated in this jurisdiction. Canadian Actors Equity was formed. And they needed a management group to negotiate the very different landscape for Canadian theatres. Over the years, PACT has grown. We now have 143 members. Originally, membership in PACT meant that you adhered to the negotiated Canadian Theatre Agreement. We now have two kinds of members, regular members and affiliates. Affiliates whose practice may not be supported by quite traditional sort of 3.5-week rehearsal, 3.5-week run, are members but don't necessarily use that agreement. They may still engage equity members, but they're not actually adhering in that way. And so over the years, PACT grew. We added different agreements. We negotiate with Associated Designers of Canada, Playwrights Guild of Canada, and we support the negotiations for our members in Quebec with the Quebec Scenic Artists Association, Scenic Designers of PASC. And I'm not going to murder that acronym in its original French. As well, in addition to those agreements, we also provide professional development programs. We have a lot of peer-to-peer support. Canadian theatre, as I'm sure you're aware, is very peer-to-peer. If you don't know what to do, the easiest thing to do is to call a friend who you know has done a similar thing at another theatre. PACT actually kind of acts like a nexus for that activity. One of the big things we do annually is our conference, which moves across the country. Was in Calgary in 2016, was in Toronto in 2015, will be in Charlottetown in 2017, which is sort of the largest gathering of theatre professionals, sort of theatre leaders, ADs, managing directors, senior staff, and it's very much a networking opportunity. When I was not in a PACT member company, I quite snottily referred to it as theatre summer camp for the rich kids, which is not what it is. But I used to see people come out of it so energized and so excited and having these new relationships. And I realized that that's really what it is. It's not very often you get to sit in a room with a bunch of peers and have conversations about all the same things we experience. Audience attrition, evolving marketing, new trends, new artistic trends, because there's a very active artistic conversation going on. And also being exposed to new ideas from elsewhere. So it's it was sort of our centerpiece. For a long time, PACT was you're in membership or out of membership. Our new strategic plan is now about openness and inclusivity. And certainly working on a major program around equity, diversity, and inclusion in Canadian theatre, which is based on sort of some training and learnings in social justice practice. So it's not just about changing your policies, it's really about identifying, an individual, generally a theatre leader's social location and how that impacts decision-making and how unconscious bias plays out in institutions, which is really reflected in an underfunded theatre community. We don't have a lot of money to do broad-based auditions or searches. And as a result, quite often you end up with what looks like a closed shop because you're going to work with people you know.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it's a way, the program is intended to break down the ways in which we look around us for other people.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited about that. It's been one of my drives since I came here. Also because I realized I'd had such a skewed perception of what the organization did. One of the things I want to do is get out and talk to the community. We advocate for theatre at the federal government. We're a member of the steering committee for the Canadian Arts Coalition, and we're a founding member. And so we're pleased to see when the Liberal Culture Platform literally picked up all of the Canadian Arts Coalition's recommendations that had been on the table for 10 years.
Right.
And now our job is to sort of help the theatre community navigate through the challenges in, funding assessment criteria in the new era.
When you're speaking about the theatre community, are you speaking broadly about the professional theatres, the equity theatres? Are you talking about the independent artists? Which part of when you were specifically speaking about the theatre community, is there an area of that is of focus for you?
Well, first I want to say there is no such thing as an equity theatre.
Okay. Yeah.
That I think I want to make that really clear. It's not like an IATSE house where the venue is a union venue. Projects either engage equity artists through the CTA or the Independent Theatre Agreement or the DOT, the Dance Opera Theatre, or Indie 2.0 or the Festivals Agreement or the I think it's called Cooperative now. Really, when I talk about the theatre community, I'm talking about the professional theatre community. It encompasses every size and shape of professional theatre. The idea that professional theatre engages artists who have trained or are in the process emerging out of their training process and who intend on pursuing careers as artists or arts workers.
Right.
That commitment is generally shown within companies by a desire to pay a living wage to artists, whether they're a member of Canadian Actors Equity or not, to pay our designers, to pay our stage management, to pay our front of house staff.
Right.
There are blended companies, generally organizations or collectives at early stages of their evolution, don't have that capacity yet. But that doesn't mean they're not professional. They are sort of at an emergent stage of their existence. So it's not. It doesn't necessarily mean incorporated, registered charities who are venue based. It can include everything from a loose collective of artists to professional theatre activity as it happens in the Rhubarb Festival. Or in the Fringe, because arguably there is a whole professional practice that has arisen within the Fringe festivals in Canada.
Absolutely, that's actually a lot of the people that I know, like personally, are the people who've come up through and are still like actively pursuing. That's their living is the Fringe festival circuit and that sort of thing. And that's a whole.
Canada has the biggest Fringe circuit in the world. Right, and from little tiny ones to big ones, and certainly. The rise of the fringes in Canada has radically changed the scope of the landscape. In fact, it caused sort of an explosion of activity, and I think it makes it quite exciting.
I think so. I think, like, for me, I know, first of all, there's people that I know that I never would have met if I wasn't for the Fringe circuit, who come from as far away as Australia to be a part of the Canadian Fringe circuit and bring their art here. Additionally, I know when I was in theater school back in the 90s, Fringe was a thing that it was just there. Nobody ever we didn't really talk about it. It was this thing that happened. And nobody ever talks about producing your own work. But now that kind of self-producing stuff has become so integral to building a career in theater for a lot of people. So it's interesting to see how the Fringe has changed just in the time that I've been looking at it.
Well, and one of the issues for me, and this is a soapbox moment. Let me get up on one.
Yeah.
Is that first we were flatlined in funding for so many years, right? After the mid-'80s, it became almost impossible for emerging companies who tended to be more exploratory, more culturally diverse, working outside the norm, to get into the cycle.
Right.
But a colleague of mine has estimated that the post-secondary institutions are graduating 1,500 new artists every year.
Yeah.
And how many new managers or producers are they graduating? Some of the post-secondary institutions have how to start your own company.
Yeah.
Which means we have a proliferation of self-producing new company environments when we could be working with the system as it exists. And part of that is I don't know that we do a terrific job in training, and I'll say theater people because I'm thinking, I thought I was going to be an actor. Then I was like, well, maybe I'll do stage management. Maybe I'll do costume design. And then I discovered as a control freak that I really was a manager and producer. Although I did write a play, which sold out in a few fringe runs. But we really are missing a next generation of theater managers and theater producers. I think there's the producers who know how to get a show up in a fringe, or renting a small venue, or engaging in a storefront, or even one of the back spaces. Yeah. But when it comes to creating a sustainable company structure that can actually then move through the process of evolution to, especially now there's more money, to employing their arts workers who are not actors, to providing a living wage, to adequately contracting, to training, to getting boards of directors to understand how we have not really created a stream for that.
Is that a failing of the institutions that are graduating so many classes? Because there aren't really. If you look at the theater schools, there aren't arts, like there aren't producing streams. There aren't that kind of education does not seem to exist.
Well, there's arts administration programs, Humber, Centennial, Grant McEwen used to have one. I don't know if they have one anymore, which are geared as postgraduate certificate programs, right? Which presupposes that someone is going to have a study. I mean, I jokingly say I never heard of anyone who graduated high school. I'm going to be an arts administrator.
No, of course.
Although I did just actually meet a couple, so no, I have to take that back. But I think the drive to work in theater is a very specific drive, and if the opportunity to become a producer was a stream outside of performance production, if you added that, I think there would be students there. If they coming out of that first year, what do they call them? Oh, the one where you do everything in 1 year, the first year syllabus.
Yeah, right? I don't remember what it's called, but I know what you're referring to.
Survey course.
Yes,
the first year survey. It would be great if there really was this is what producers can do. This is what theater managers can do. And I think it isn't a lack. Yeah. And it's something that's sort of on my agenda to continue to push forward. Because we're going to have a big gap pretty soon.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of people who are learning how to produce on their feet, which is not necessarily the best way to do it. And to go from producing fringe to producing like full theater, like a season, or even just like granting opportunity, like that sort of thing, that is hard to learn on your feet without a lot of trial and error. And that's a really expensive trial and error if you're like trying to produce that way.
Well, and mentorship and internship programs. I mean, once upon a time, 30 years ago, when I started, there were more there were fewer companies and there was more internships. Yeah. Because it was pre-Fringe, actually. Or the Edmonton Fringe had started, but Toronto hadn't launched.
Right.
And so, in general, you graduated theater school, you got a job in front of house, or in the office, or you worked box office, or you had a day job, and you began to pick up fringe producing on the side. If you were fortunate, you secured an internship and got to work in a company where you could acquire those skills.
Right.
And that was how, and none of us had any formal training, and that is how we became theater managers. Yeah. You know, my generation is Nancy Webster. Well, she was in my class, so she's always the one I remember. But I mean, we sort of went through that generation. Yeah. We had mentors who stayed with us throughout. And now what you see is that there's actually many emerging young producers, really talented administrators, who could be amazing, are actually stuck because there's no way for them to get that.
Right. They can't get that push to become more proficient in what they're doing.
That's right. Yeah. And so that, I think, is something we have to look at in a big way and start having those conversations. In the same way that there is actually no formal training program for an artistic director.
That's very true. That's very true. I think, just like with producing, the only way that you learn how to be an artistic director is for somebody to put you in that role and say, what's your season?
Well, and, you know, and you start, you know, you are, you work within a theater in the box office, you apply to another theater, maybe you've written a play, maybe you've directed a couple of shows in a fringe, and then maybe you get an associate artist, maybe you get a Theatre Ontario professional theatre training program. I know Ontario better than the rest because I went through my professional life here. And then you move into associate artistic directorship, getting a director on the show, having a relationship and a reputation, and then moving up. And in fact, we see that across the country. You know?
Yeah. I'm not even sure, like, because I think that I know there's a lot of people that I can think of who are in that position of being quite almost at a loss because it is actually hard to get into a fringe. Right?
Yeah, well,
because
it's
the lottery,
luck of the draw.
Exactly, luck of the draw. But if you get in, then great. But if you don't, then you're like, how do I produce this thing? Because fringe is at a certain level that's affordable for the independent artist. And then, but how do you go beyond that? If you have something that you want to do, I think there's a lack of a knowledge that mentorship and that sort of thing would help with.
I think so too, and certainly for people who come through that, right? Yeah. I think it also depends on whether or not you produced a show when you were at school. Because sometimes artists graduate and they've been part of departmental productions, but they've never actually produced a show.
Right.
I went to York, which I was really fortunate. There was tons of independent work on campus. In fact, got to the stage that by third year, I was having profs say, "Are you still in the program?" I'd be like, yeah. I'm just doing all sorts of other stuff.
Yeah. So I think it's funny because I know that like all the programs are different because I came out of the George Brown.
Oh, and you're not allowed to do anything.
There's no. You are in it and you're doing that, so there isn't a whole lot of opportunity. But again, when I was at George Brown, there wasn't like nobody talked about independent producing. Your track was going to be audition, get the role, audition, get the role, audition, get the role, and that was going to be your life. And we never talked about self-producing or producing your own work. And if we did, it was a sidebar for somebody who might not be a successful actor in that sense.
Right.
Maybe you could do your own work.
You poor thing.
You poor thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very funny because I realized halfway through first year university that as much as I like to be on stage, and mostly because I thought it was hilarious to cover lines for people who forgot, I was not a brilliant performer. I was a fine comedian, but that was about it. But that did not mean I didn't want to work in theater. And that's where I think looking at theater administrators or theater managers or theater producers as failed performers or failed artists is actually not to credit them with, they know theater, they have an eye, they have an aesthetic bent, they have the capacity to work with directors and artistic directors to put together the seasons and the programs. They're not... I once had somebody refer to me as a bureaucrat. We're not bureaucrats. That's not what we do.
No.
And that's why, although ironically I'm at like a meta theater organization, because we don't produce theater, we just help people produce theater.
Right.
And I will say I do miss artists in my space. That's a really, I feel the lack.
Yeah.
But producing is a very real, one of the pillars of the sector, and it doesn't get the credit.
No.
Mostly because it's not glamorous.
It's not glamorous. And again, most people who end up producing their own work never thought that was going to be something that they would do. A lot of people just sort of think, I'm going to become an actor, and that's about as much as they've thought. And then when the reality sets in, a lot of times they don't even realize that they're producing, and so it just becomes trial and error and a little bit of a mess. And with that, does PACT have programs for the independent, like the actor, the performer, producer?
We don't. We're very much, because of the way we evolve, we're very much geared to the notion of organization. In fact, our bylaws, to be a member, you have to be an incorporated organization. Because one of the things that we do is we say it is for the professional community. So we have a membership committee that reviews and says, yep, look at those finances. They've produced 2 shows over that. They have declared a season. They have a history of paying their artists. So we're in no way an arbiter, but we basically say, yeah. We agree that these people have come here. But that doesn't mean that someone who was going to be an independent producer couldn't actually seek support as through our services, through relationships. Like, you don't have to be a PACT member to come to the conference. We are about to launch a new engagement program for non-producing theater organizations and also for independent professionals, which is kind of geared to producers, production managers, who are between gigs but who want to remain engaged with the community. And we're also working to support learning on the part of emerging producers and managers. We talk. I'm going to speak at Humber on Thursday about the so exciting labor relations in Canadian theatre and human resources. And so we engage in sort of participation. We helped co-present the Indie Exchange with TAPA, which was grew out of what used to be the Small Theatre Trade Forum, which is really learning experiences where you bring in granting officers to talk about writing grants, marketing people to talk about how to create a marketing campaign, all of that kind of thing. So we support it, but it's not at the forefront currently of our programs.
I'm curious about that conference that you have, because I know that one of the things that I often have struggled with as somebody who, a performer, as a creator of theater and in those sorts of ways, is finding the community of theater people, because it can be a bit of a solitary thing. You work by yourself, or you work with a small group of people, but how do you grow outside of what can sometimes seem a cliquish work environment where you're working with people that you know, always looking for ways to reach out. What if somebody was to go to the conference in Charlottetown? What kind of things would they see there?
So every conference, we try to develop a theme for every conference, and with the new strategic plan, Toronto was outside looking in, was the notion of where was the center of Canadian theatre. In Calgary, the theme, sort of as it essentially, was building bridges between organizations, and we're trying to come up with a good name for it, but working together, really, at Charlottetown. Once upon a time, it was really just artistic directors and general managers of companies. We've expanded that. We are encouraging student participation. In 2015, NTS sponsored 10 of their students to attend the conference in Toronto. 2 of those students led a panel last year in Calgary, which was about building bridges between the emerging professional and the professional community. And we hope to see a lot of student participation in Charlottetown. I'm going to be speaking to the dean at Grenfell campus in Newfoundland, which has an 80 student performance stagecraft program, and we hope to see them there. So if you're a newcomer to a PACT conference, you can say, I'm a first-timer, and we'll pair you with a conference buddy who will basically say, okay, who do you want to meet? What do you want to know? We'll go to these sessions. So we haven't set the programming, so I'm going to use Calgary as an example. So Calgary, we have a number of plenary speakers. We brought in Nikkei Jonah and Hassan, whose last name escapes me, who had been the internal critics at the Arts Council of England, who helped them develop their diversity programming and sort of their equity program throughout the council. So we have a number of plenary sessions like that. We also did a session on holding territory, which was about the relationship, the Indigenous peoples, the host. If you were a host nation, what does it mean when people come onto your land, whether you're settlers or from another nation? And so those plenary sessions are really sort of inspiring speeches. Then we have a number of breakout sessions. So we did a piece on Kahoot's newly released Deaf Artist Toolkit, so that people could be exposed to what does that mean working with deaf artists in theater. How to have an inclusive signed performance. We did sessions on marketing in the age of social media, which is always a hearty conversation because everybody does it and understands it differently. There are rooms, round tables where there's an artistic director's round table and a general manager's director's round table. Which have now gotten really big, so we want to actually try and break them out a bit smaller, in which people just talk about the current things they're dealing with. So someone can sit in a room of general managers and everybody can talk about, Castle and the widely misunderstood Canadian commercial anti-spam law, or how to motivate staff in a small company when you've had a bad year. What do you do when a staff member starts to call in sick all the time? How do you work with your board of directors when they begin to meddle a little bit too much in what it is, the professional leaders know how to do? We're also, last year we did open space technology, which is creating conversations that are based on people in the room. So everybody comes together and puts subjects that they want to talk about on the table. Of course, none of which I can remember off the top of my head right now. I ended up in one which was about the awkward conversation, which was around the Canada 150 grant and the fact that it was actually sort of it felt predisposed to privilege those organizations who had the capacity to develop and create and put together a grant application for a bold project because they already had, right? So any equity-seeking organization couldn't break through that. So that was sort of quite a hearty conversation. There were conversations about what to do about burnout when you're and we all have it. So hearing from. And in that room, there was, our board member was led by, I think it was Ardith from Manitoba Theatre Projects Manitoba, pardon me. And so that group had some of the students in it. And we've also begun to invite, to find local partners who will sponsor the participation of emerging and culturally diverse organizations. Because the registration is about $450, but it covers some meals, etc. But it can be impossible for an individual working within a small, unfunded organization to put that together with the travel money. So that sponsorship is there, and so those conversations are bringing, I think, fresh voices to the table. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of talking. You start talking the day you get there. And then the airport on the way out is always hilarious because everyone is sitting around and no one is talking anymore. We have 4 days of nonstop talking about theater.
Yeah.
And it's very exciting. And plus, this year, I've never been to Charlottetown. So
it's gorgeous.
It's
gorgeous.
Yeah. I mean, it's end of May. Can't be any worse than the first conference I attended was in Cowhead at the end of May in Newfoundland, where it snowed. It's an opportunity to sort of see the world and see colleagues again. And you build such great relationships.
Yeah.
And people you can pick up the phone to at any time. And that's the thing, I think, that it really demystifies the notion that there's some kind of inside and outside.
Right.
Sometimes just people you haven't met yet.
Yeah, yeah. Do you find there's a lot more conversation? Are you seeing a lot of conversation about where the audience is going? I know that a couple of years ago during NTSF in Toronto, there was a conversation that Derek Chua put together with a number of people where they were talking about where is our audience going? And that was a general thing, and people sat for 2 hours, and we never really came up with an answer. But are the members of PACT talking about that?
Well, we do talk about it because there are different kinds of audiences, right?
Yeah.
The question is, where are our older audiences going? Well, you know what? They're not actually coming to theater anymore. The original sort of older, white, middle-class, university educated. The early boomers are now, they may not be coming to theater as much as they used to. Subscription patterns are changing. I think we've actually really diversified our audiences. And there used to be, in Toronto, for example, there used to be people who would subscribe to Factory, Tarragon, and Canadian Stage.
Yeah.
Or to Soul Pepper National Ballet in Tarragon. Or, and I think that the behaviors have changed.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think they've gone away. But we have, particularly in the big urban centers, there's such a multiplicity of option. I personally have always thought at a certain point people just shut down and say, I'm not making a decision.
Yeah.
I'm going to stay home in my pajamas.
Well, I mean, I was just thinking about that because also at home there's TV, Netflix, there's all those other things. There's the DVDs that you spend years collecting. And
yeah.
So
I know you haven't looked at it in ages.
Yeah, of course. But there's all these things. So I guess that it's that question that everybody's still asking is how do you get people away from Netflix to come out on TV, which is the unanswered question.
Well, I think it depends. Certainly with some younger audiences, and I would call them the emerging audiences, right? Mid-20s to 30s, who have a choice to go to a concert, go to a film, go to a club, go out for dinner. They're actually looking very much for a whole evening experience, right? Yeah. Their buying patterns have changed. Years ago, before the mid-sized theaters took credit cards to reserve tickets, people would just call and leave their name and number, and you'd be like, I'll put you down for 2.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, I forget what happened. First time the Blue Jays were in the World Series, I was at a company, and that was our pattern. And then we ended up with a show that had been basically sold out.
Yeah.
Game 2 of the World Series. We were down to 6 people.
Yeah.
So there are competing attentions. Then there's also, so then you move to taking credit cards. And then people were booking, a couple of weeks out, maybe a month out, or if they weren't subscribers. And then about 6 years ago, the pattern started to change. The lead time on the booking got shorter. Because people were like, I don't know what I'm going to want to do at the end of the week. They'd make their decision on the Monday night.
Yeah.
Then it went to maybe the Wednesday night.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it flipped around again and moved back to walk-up.
Huh.
Right?
Yeah.
So young people were not booking, and I say young people because I'm old, right? You would see that people, instead of booking a ticket online, which they had been the year before, they'd been booking a ticket online the night before.
Yeah.
Then I would say 2 years ago, it turned into they were making the decision about what they were going to do at dinner.
Yeah.
So then you got walk-ins.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the behaviors have changed. The question is how we respond to those changed behaviors. I look at the rise in the storefront movement.
Yeah.
Whatever my concerns may be about the spaces. The reality is that for someone in a storefront theater that holds 60 people, the 35 people that would make a 100-seat house feel empty, it feels packed out. It's exciting. It's dynamic. They spill out onto the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And figuring out how we connect with the appropriate audience, because there is no such thing as a universal audience.
Yeah.
There's an audience for that show at that time in that space with those artists, which is what makes theater exciting, because it's very what's the word? Ephemeral.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Even though it could be an existing text, if you don't see that night,
you will never be that again.
You will never be that audience member again, and that show will never happen in that way again. So figuring out how to create that ongoing excitement about it is what I think theaters are, I wouldn't say struggling with, because theater is nothing if not a great innovator. It's just that the environment we're in has changed so rapidly. It has changed
very
much
quickly,
more
very
rapidly
quickly,
than our practice has.
Well, and I don't think it's ever changed quite this quickly before because of the innovations in technology. Going from when people were talking about the importance of tweet seats that I never thought were really. I don't think tweet seats ever really became a thing. People thought people needed to be able to tweet about the show while they were watching it, and then still the whole question of getting people away from their social media.
And now it's not even Twitter anymore; it's Instagram.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, which is its own thing, because you don't want people taking pictures during the show anyway. I mean, I've worked front of house. I know that.
Oh no, they can't.
That's the question, right? Is that it's they want to, but you have to find what does your audience want as opposed to what the production wants and things like that.
Well, here's an interesting thing. So we PACT. It's actually a volunteer team negotiates the individual agreements. Right now, we're in 2016 is year 2 of the current CTA. Yes. So we start pre-negotiations in the fall of 2017 for the next Canadian Theatre Agreement. 2012 to 2015 Theatre Agreement used the word blogger. We talked about it.
Yes.
In 2015 to 2018, the language was changed to social media.
Yes.
We now have to anticipate in discussions in the fall of 2017, and so I put together sort of a working group of marketing directors and people who've worked with this, what marketing and communications practice we have to figure out if we can anticipate what that's going to look in the next agreement, which will run, am I remembering this correctly, to 2021. Just a minute. Terminates 2018. Yes, the next one's 2018, 19, 19, 20, 20, 21. We have to figure out how we will need to communicate and promote the word. In advance of the technology.
Which is difficult considering how quickly it's changing.
Absolutely, absolutely. When the current CTA was negotiated, because the negotiation starts like 8 months before it needs to be adopted, companies were not using boosted Facebook posts.
Right.
Or at least not very often.
Right.
And now it's a regular thing.
Yeah.
But the question is that the same as a television advertisement? Does that mean ACTRA agreement rates kick in? For the $27 you spent to boost the post to 3,000 people who said theater and were in downtown Toronto?
Yeah.
There's a huge evolution, and I think in some ways still the best is word of mouth.
Yeah.
Whether it's Facebook or Twitter, you have to look at who the person is.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Who's actually doing that tweet.
You have to look at who they are, what's the quality of their follower and that engagement, because you can't know, not everybody is the same.
No, and the other thing about it is, once upon a time, theaters had love-hate relationships with the critics. Mm-hmm. Right? You absolutely wanted the critic to come to your opening night because if they loved the show, you were going to do fine. Mm-hmm. They didn't always love the show, so still, we pursued them to get them into the house.
Yeah.
And I used to say, there's no guarantee now. I used to say 2 years ago. I used to say, there's no guarantee that a good review will fill the house.
No.
But there is a guarantee that a bad review will kill the house.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
And yet, newspapers are dying.
Yeah.
We have the rise in bloggers.
Yeah.
I had an artistic director call me and talking about the number of blogger reviewers who sought opening night tickets. Mm-hmm. And he was like, is there some kind of accreditation process for this? And I said, no. But to be fair, we don't have an accreditation process for our regular reviewers either. Yeah. I said, but there's a certain, caveat emptor. You've got to be aware of who you're booking into the house. Read their previous stuff. Check out their reviews. But I think, excited, happy audiences are the best way, or moved, or incented, are really one of the best ways to grow audiences. But then you have the problem with, if you've only got a 2-week run, what on earth are you going to do?
Well, that's the problem with most reviews, for one thing. Because if you only have a 2-week run, that review can only really do you benefit in the second half.
And Toronto Star only has sort of 2 review windows, it looks like now, Thursday and Sunday. And
Toronto Star is reviewing stuff. Globe Mail is reviewing stuff. The Toronto Sun only reviews stuff in certain venues, so your print media is not really your friend there.
Well,
there's no really reviews.
Arguably, the question is how many of the Toronto Sun readership are actually.
Well, there is that. There is that. But I mean, in terms of like, there, you don't get theater reviews on television, so that's out. So you've got your print media, you've got your online media, and really, I think what people trust more than that is the people on their Facebook feed.
Yep.
And you look for those people who are connectors, who are talking about shows that they've seen, shows that they like. What should they look for? Those are the trusted audiences that can get people out. I think even more than. I mean, there are some trusted reviewers that I really enjoy, or sources that I enjoy, but there's only really a couple, and there's thousands of theater blogs.
And it's also that theaters are expanding the way they have conversations about what's happening in the theater. Mm-hmm. It's like, we'll have a talk back, there'll be a pre-show talk, later on you can communicate, there'll be a Twitter chat about the shows. And I don't want to say they're flailing, but I think each theater's trying to figure out the way it works best for their audience, for their particular set of people who come into their space, or the space that they've rented for that production. And it would be so fabulous if there was like an A plus B plus C equals plus good work equals a full house, right?
Yeah.
But there isn't.
No. And that's the challenge, is how do you get the word out? And that's always been, I think, the challenge, is how do you get the word out, especially with limited budgets. Because there's maybe only one place in this city that can afford to advertise on TV, and everybody else has to advertise on subways or even just in the, like, by putting up posters in the Starbucks. I
know. I'm saying the subway, that's actually a big buy.
Yeah.
In order to make that have any value, really.
Oh yeah,
you're talking thousands and thousands.
Oh, absolutely. I remember doing a production years ago, and I purchased 2 posters in a subway station.
Yeah,
a Young and Bloor. But that was the biggest spend I did for that production.
Yeah,
and I would hate to see what it was now. And it was not effective to do those two posters. You have to do a lot more than that.
Well, and so the question is, that's whether you go niche marketing or broad-based marketing. Yep. Do you decide, okay, I know that how many people do I need in that house?
Yeah.
Right? I need 1,400 people. The 100-seat house to make my budget. So where am I going to find those 1,400 people?
Right.
And then you break it down into, I know a certain number of them are going to this bar. I will go and ask that bar owner and ask those bartenders, if they will come see the show on the opening night, can I put stuff out in the bar? The best way to do it is to figure out who are going to be your ambassadors for your show in a particular niche market. It's hilarious. One of the most successful marketing things I ever did was around the Fringe show I co-wrote with a friend, and this is 24 years ago, the Blonde Jokes Forever at the time, so it was called Blonde. So we decided we would go after hair salons. And so we went into every hair salon and talked to the head stylist and handed them cards and talked about blondness. And hairstylists need something to talk about.
Yes, yeah.
So they talked the show up. It was great. Yeah. It worked really, really well. Yeah, I mean, and then we did all the other things too, right? We postered, we postcarded, we did all of that. Yeah. But I honestly think that finding a community who had the capacity to do the talking was the most effective, and that's because you had people who were desperately looking for conversation. With people who sat in chairs in front of them for 8 hours every day. If only it was that easy.
If only it was that easy. Yeah.
We used to. The Toronto, when it was the Toronto Theatre Alliance, it's now the Toronto Alliance for the Performing Arts, used to once a year have, and it was back in the day when everybody had brochures, right? Used to have a coffee and donuts with cab drivers, and so we would go to sometimes it would be in a hotel, and through a drive-through, and they could come and they could get a coffee and they could get a donut, and they could listen to a bit of a spiel and talk. And then, because cab drivers would then be in the city and someone would say, I'm from out of town, what should I be doing?
Yeah.
And in every city, too, there are concierge associations. Toronto has a very powerful concierge association. Invite the concierges to your previews. Get to know them. Talk to them about what they're looking to recommend. Because every single downtown hotel has somebody who says, I want something that's not usual. Yeah.
Just with a little bit of time that I have left, you've alluded a couple of times to your path to how you got to where you are. I would actually love to hear about, first off, what is it about theater that drew you to it when you were young, and what was your path to getting to be where you are now?
Okay, I'm going to start long.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was one of those 6-year-olds who put together variety shows with neighborhood kids on the picnic table. Wrote my own music, did my own stuff, was in school plays from 9. Went to high school where it was all musicals all the time. Started a non-musical company. But I grew up in Kingston, which had an incredibly high per capita amount of community theater. I started, building sets and doing front of house when I was 13 for one of the local community theaters, Domino Theater. And slowly I started doing that, continued to perform, thought I was going to be a performer.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, at 17, I was house managing the Grand Theatre, which is an 826-seat roadhouse. Applied to go to university. So I had caught it, right?
Yeah.
I had the theatre.
Yeah.
Never considered anything else. Did not want to grow up and go into film. That was never part of my thing. And I think it's, part of it is front of house and backstage work and the hush and the excitement and the anticipation. That moment where it's going to happen. And you don't know what's going to happen because it's live. Yeah. Although you know what's going to happen. You know it's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
And went to York. Of course, I wanted to be a performer. As I said, turned out, guess what? But then I started working on, I became a fixer in non-departmental productions. I would fix in costume design. I was basically sort of a producer who would come in and resolve the issues with the Pink Ladies jackets for the industry,
Yeah.
because the stage manager had shrunk everything, you know. Realized I couldn't be a stage manager because I would get frustrated easily.
Right.
It would be like, your costume is here on the rack under the piece of masking tape with your name on it.
Yep.
It's your character's name. It's not your name, but, you know, you get the point. Which was not good. And so a friend of mine was on a work program at the theatre centre in box office. And this is 84. And I graduated university. I'd only ever had one other job as waitress in a restaurant. It was terrible. It was terrible. Terrible waitress. I'd also done hostessing, but it's basically all that kind of stuff. And so I went to this work program and said, tell you what, if you give me this job, I haven't been out of school and out of work for 16 weeks, but if you give this to me, I won't have to apply for welfare. So you might as well give it to me now. And so I started at the theatre centre. Mm-hmm. And when I left in 1992, I was the producer. It helped that it turned out, I didn't really embrace it until I was in my 40s, that I'm a control freak. I like to know how to do everything.
Right.
I like to know how to do everything well. And so, I got an internship. I learned how to bookkeep in big 30-column blue line. Had to do it in pencil because I was always getting it wrong, whether it was a debit or a credit. I had some great mentors. Great Cynthia Grant, who was the founding artistic director of Nightwood. Clara Hopkinson, who's now at the Toronto Arts Council. Svetlana Zylan, who was a director-dramaturg who passed away a number of years ago. I was really fortunate. I ran the theatre centre in the Port Alex, in Lippincott, which is a disappeared space, now condos, down on Queen Street. Now it's like a swingers club across.
The swingers club moved out, so it's like I remember that space.
That was Sergeant A. Trowell's
under
branch.
The Legion, wasn't it?
It was the Sergeant A. Trowell's branch of the Royal Canadian Legion.
Yep.
We had the main space.
I actually remember doing a Summer Works performance in that space. And something was going on.
That must have been the first year of Summer Works.
It was like second or first, maybe first or second year. And there was some kind of something going on upstairs from the Legion, which was almost drowning out what we were doing.
They used to have polka nights. I used to have a fight. I used to fight with the president of the Legion over it. It was very funny because they didn't want to come see our shows. No. Anyway, and so then I got a Canada Council B grant because I had only been at the theatre centre. And I did independent producing. And I worked with Death Waits, an artist who is now a poet, Jacob Bren. I worked with all sorts of different companies. Company of Sirens, which was Cynthia Grant's follow-up company. DNA Theatre, which was Hilla Latoya. And so did that for a long time. And then I was general manager for the Ontario Puppetry Association. And then went to the Dance Umbrella as I'm telling you, there's an entire generation of arts administrators in the city of Toronto who all spent some period of time at the Dance Umbrella. And then I left theatre and ran an Apple computer dealership, Carbon Computing, for almost 9 years, which was super fun. It was, when I went there, it was buy low, sell high. If you felt like it, turn off the phones and play Quake. The owner used to take all the staff out to see the next Star Wars movie. And we went from, 5 guys, buy low, sell high, to 45 employees, 3 locations.
Right.
And sort of got bored with that. But it's all the same skills as running a theatre company.
Do you remember what it was that made you leave the theatre?
Well, it was a couple of things. Mike Harris had been elected for the second time. I was really tired. I had been working, at that point, marketing dance shows, which was heartbreaking. Artists, choreographers would work for 2 years creating work, and they would come to you and say, I have a show in 6 weeks at the Winch. I have $1,500. Can you bring me an audience?
Right.
And I was like, But I got to work with Peggy Baker and Denise Fujiwara and Bill James. So that was quite amazing. But it was tired. I just had my second child. Dan Simberler was restructuring, and I was really tired. I was exhausted. I just thought, I can't do this anymore. So I stayed on the board. I was on the board of Theatre Gargantua almost that entire time. I didn't see a lot of theatre. I was almost in a self-imposed exile.
Right.
And then I came back.
What was it that brought you back in?
I love Carbon. It was like I'd done my time. There was nothing more for me to build. There were no more problems for me to solve. Apple was selling direct, and so gutting the market that we had built. And I considered staying in technology, but it's exhausting. You work 50 or 60-hour weeks running a multi-million-dollar company. You're accruing somebody else's wealth. I thought, if I'm going to work 50 or 60 hours a week, I might as well be doing it in something enough. So I came back to theater and came back with a vengeance. Love it. And now, so I was at the Young Center. I moved from the Young Center to Factory and was there from 2009 to 2014, during the big transition year. And then this job came up, and I thought, I would like to work with companies who I know we're all experiencing the same thing. Flatline government grants, audience attrition, changing patterns. And I thought I want to make change at a bigger level. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. We're basically at an hour, and I've really enjoyed talking with you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Phil.